Look closely. These aren't actors in a zombie movie. These are real Americans in 2025, walking slowly, staring blankly, drifting through streets that look more like an apocalypse than a country that once led the world. This isn't fiction. This is the moment America finally breaks. One collapsed city at a time. A street that was once loud, bright, and full of normal American life now sits frozen under a gray sky. A few figures move slowly across the frame, not walking with purpose, not heading anywhere, just drifting. Their eyes are blank. Their steps are uneven. Their bodies look like they're carrying invisible weight. From a distance, you wouldn't think they're citizens of the richest country on earth. You'd think you're watching the opening scene of a zombie film. But this isn't Hollywood. This is real life. In today's America, more and more streets look like this. More and more people look like this. Not because of some imaginary virus or a science fiction apocalypse, but because the collapse has already begun in ways no one wants to admit. As rents explode, as drugs tear through neighborhoods, as inflation crushes every part of daily life, you begin to see a strange transformation happening across the country. People aren't dying, but they're no longer fully living either. They're stuck in a state that feels like walking sleep, a kind of emotional shutdown, a kind of quiet defeat. These are the new zombies of America. Not monsters, not villains, just ordinary people drained by a system that leaves them with nothing to stand on. You see it in their eyes, the exhaustion of someone who hasn't slept in days, the hunger of someone who hasn't had a real meal in weeks, the fear of someone who doesn't know where they'll wake up tomorrow. You see people moving slowly through alleyways, wandering sidewalks with blank stares, collapsing on corners, leaning against walls as if the world has stopped caring about them. And in many places, it truly has. Tent cities stretch across sidewalks like endless scars. Blocks once filled with busy shops now sit empty and boarded up. Businesses that survived decades have shut their doors for the last time. And in the middle of all that collapse, people drift like shadows, lost between survival and surrender. They don't look like the Americans you see in commercials, smiling families in perfect houses. They look like survivors of a disaster no one wants to name. A disaster happening in slow motion. And the strangest part? This transformation didn't come from a sudden catastrophe. It came from years of pressure building, years of rising costs, years of economic decay. It came from a country pretending everything was fine while millions slipped into hopelessness. It came from problems too big for anyone to fix quickly, and too painful for politicians to talk about honestly. And now, the result of all that silence is playing out in front of us. The slow rise of zombie cities. Places where the energy is gone, the hope is gone, the future is gone. As you watch these streets, as you look into the faces of people who look like they're barely hanging on, a chilling question forms. How much worse will this get? Because this doesn't look like a temporary crisis anymore. This looks like the early stages of something deeper, something darker. A national unraveling. A slow-motion meltdown spreading from one block to another, from one city to another, until no place feels safe from the collapse. Today, we're stepping inside these forgotten zones. We're looking at how America, a nation built on dreams, ended up with streets full of people who look like they've already given up. As you begin to move deeper into these streets, you notice something unsettling. The faces of the people drifting past you all share the same empty, distant expression. It's the look of someone trapped between exhaustion and despair. The look of someone who has stopped expecting tomorrow to be any better than today. And it's here, in this strange emotional emptiness that the real definition of America's new zombie problem begins to take shape. These aren't creatures from horror films. These are citizens whose lives have been slowly stripped of stability, security, and meaning. They walk slowly, not because they're dangerous, but because they're drained. They stare blankly, not because their minds are gone, but because their hope is. They move without direction because they have nowhere left to go. And the deeper you look, the more you realize this isn't a fringe issue. It's a symptom of a country under extreme pressure. Every system that once held people together, affordable housing, stable work, mental health care, community support, has cracked. And through those cracks, millions are slipping through. Some fall into addiction, their bodies and minds poisoned by drugs so powerful they freeze a person's ability to feel anything. Others fall into homelessness, pushed onto the streets by rent prices higher than their entire paychecks. Some fall into a kind of emotional collapse, working 2 or 3 jobs, yet still unable to break free from the stress and exhaustion that consume them. And once a person falls, the climb back becomes almost impossible. In many cities, the drug epidemic has created scenes that look unreal. You see people hunched over in unnatural positions, swaying in slow motion, their bodies stuck between consciousness and unconsciousness. You watch others pacing the same few feet, again and again, as if their minds are looping in a place they can't escape. It's frightening, not because these people are dangerous, but because you can see a human soul trapped inside a body that no longer responds to the world around it. The modern zombie isn't a myth. It's a metaphor for a population crushed by a system that no longer works for them. It's what happens when life becomes too heavy, too chaotic, too expensive, too hopeless. It's what happens when a society demands endless strength from people who are already on their last bit of energy. But it's not just drugs. It's not just homelessness. It's a mix of forces hitting all at once. A perfect storm of economic meltdown and emotional collapse. Inflation makes every meal feel like a luxury. Rent takes half, sometimes more, of a person's entire monthly income. Wages barely move while costs explode. Savings vanish. Credit card debt rises. And slowly, people start to break. Not loudly, not dramatically, but silently, one day at a time. And now you see the results in plain sight. Streets filled with people wandering aimlessly, faces blank, spirits drained. A country where millions feel invisible, forgotten, and stuck in survival mode. The kind of exhaustion that turns a person into a shell of who they used to be. Some stand on street corners staring at the ground. Others sleep in doorways because they have nowhere else to go. Some sit motionless for hours, lost in their own thoughts. And the most chilling part? You can see the same tired look appearing even in people who still have homes, still have jobs, still pretend they're fine. It's spreading quietly. This numbness, this emotional burnout, this slow transformation into something that looks like life, but doesn't feel like it. This is the new American reality. Not a sudden apocalypse, but a gradual erosion of human strength. A country filled with people who are alive, but barely living. When you step back and look at America from above, you start to notice a disturbing pattern. It's not one city breaking down. It's not one neighborhood collapsing. It's a chain reaction spreading across the nation, and each place looks a little more hollow, a little more broken, a little more like the opening scene of an apocalypse movie. These are the new zombie cities of America, and they're rising in plain sight. Walk through San Francisco today, and you find entire blocks that feel frozen in time. Not the beautiful postcard version, the real version. Streets lined with tents, People slumped against walls as cars inch past. Storefronts locked behind metal gates because shop owners are too afraid to open. Trash piling up at every corner. A once golden city moving in slow motion, drained of the energy it was famous for. Go to Los Angeles, and you see endless ghost-like crowds drifting along sidewalks that used to belong to tourists and families. Under highway bridges, whole communities have formed, not by choice, but by necessity. It's a city still full of wealth, still full of glamour, but when you peel back the surface, you find miles of suffering hidden in plain sight. Head north to Portland, and the transformation is even more surreal. Streets that once felt artistic, free, and alive are now quiet in a way that feels unnatural. Store after store closed. Blacked-out windows. People wandering aimlessly with faces that look lost in a world that no longer makes sense. A city famous for creativity, now drowning under a crisis too big for anyone to control. Walk through Chicago, and you feel the tension in the air. A city fighting for its identity. Boarded windows, empty sidewalks. Neighborhoods where small businesses that survived generations have finally given up. The collapse isn't loud, it's silent, steady, and everywhere. And then there's Philadelphia, the heart of one of the darkest real-life transformations happening in America. A place where entire blocks look like a living nightmare. People moving like shadows, leaning against telephone poles, their bodies barely responding to the world around them. Scenes so shocking that visitors freeze, trying to understand how something like this could exist in a modern country. But here's the truth. None of these cities collapsed overnight. They eroded slowly, quietly, inch by inch. And one day, the people living there woke up and realized their city wasn't alive anymore. It was decaying, drifting, sliding into a version of itself they no longer recognized. This is what the rise of the zombie cities really looks like. Not a sudden explosion, but a slow fade, a draining of hope, of order, of life. What makes it even more terrifying is that many Americans don't notice the transformation until it hits their own doorstep. They scroll past videos of these places thinking, it's only happening over there. But every year, the cracks spread. Every year, more cities join the list. Every year, more communities slip into the gray zone between functioning and failing. Businesses leave, streets empty, crime rises quietly. Homeless camps expand. Drug markets take over corners. Police units shrink. Mental health centers disappear. And with each piece that falls away, a city moves one step closer to becoming another chapter in America's growing list of silent disasters. These zombie cities are not an accident. They are the result of years of neglect, years of ignoring problems until they grew too big, too deep, too tangled to solve quickly. And now, the consequences are everywhere. And as you look at these cities, the boarded windows, the drifting crowds, the empty eyes, you feel something chilling in your chest. If these cities fell, what makes you think others won't follow? As you move from city to city, from broken street to broken street, the question becomes impossible to ignore. How did so many Americans end up like this? How did so many people drift into a state where their bodies keep moving, but their spirit has shut down? The truth is brutal, because it didn't come from one cause. It came from layers of collapse piling on top of one another until millions of people simply couldn't carry the weight anymore. Some of the faces you see on these streets belong to people swallowed by the drug crisis, a crisis so powerful and so destructive that it doesn't just damage a life, it erases it. The drugs tearing through American cities today aren't mild, aren't recreational. aren't temporary. They're chemical traps designed to freeze someone inside their own body. You look at a person bent at the waist, unmoving, eyes half closed, body limp like a puppet with cut strings, and you realize this isn't addiction, as the world once knew it. This is something darker, something that pulls a human being out of their own life and leaves only a shadow standing there. But not everyone on these streets is a victim of drugs. Millions are victims of something quieter, something less visible: economic suffocation. Once, having a job in America meant stability. Now, even with a job, people are drowning. Essentials, food, rent, gas, bills, have all climbed to levels the average worker can't keep up with. Wages stayed still while the cost of simply existing exploded. And so people work and work and work. Until one day, their body keeps going, but their mind gives up. That's why so many look empty. That's why so many stare into nothing. That's why their steps look heavy. Why their shoulders stay low. Why their eyes don't shine with the spark of someone who believes tomorrow will be better. For millions, tomorrow is just another version of the same struggle. And then there's homelessness, the silent destroyer. Losing a home is not like losing a possession. It's losing your foundation, your stability, your identity. A person without a home becomes invisible to society in a way that's almost impossible to describe. Days blend together. Nights are long and cold. Every hour is spent searching for survival. Not growth, not improvement. Just survival. And in that kind of life, the light inside a person slowly dims. You can see it clearly. The zombie look is really just the look of a soul running on empty. But there's another layer, one that people rarely talk about. A kind of emotional burnout spreading across the country like a silent disease. Even people who still have houses, still have cars, still have jobs, walk around with the same tired, empty expression. They're not homeless, they're not addicted, but they're exhausted, drained, and constantly anxious. America has become a place where survival requires constant fight, constant stress, constant grinding, and human beings aren't built for non-stop pressure. So, they break. Not loudly, not all at once, but slowly. You see young people with dead eyes, middle-aged workers with stiff, tired faces, parents walking like ghosts from one shift to another, seniors wandering supermarket aisles trying to make their last few dollars stretch. And across all of them, whether addicted, homeless, overworked, or simply hopeless, you see the same expression: a quiet surrender. That's the real zombie epidemic. Human beings pushed past their limits until their mind disconnects from their life, leaving only a body going through the motions. This isn't horror. This isn't fiction. This is what happens when a society collapses from the inside. At first, people tried to comfort themselves by saying, "It's only happening in the big cities." They pointed to San Francisco, Los Angeles, Portland, Chicago, Philadelphia, as if the crisis had borders, as if the collapse knew how to stop at a city limit sign. They acted like this was an urban problem, a local issue, a distant tragedy they could ignore from the safety of their quiet neighborhoods. But collapse doesn't obey geography. And slowly, quietly, the symptoms began leaking outward. Drive through small towns today, places that used to feel calm, steady, predictable. And you'll notice something is changing. The main streets aren't as busy. The shops that were once community landmarks now sit half-empty or fully abandoned. Gas stations feel strangely quiet. And at the edges of town, Behind old grocery stores or near the train tracks, you start seeing tents, tarps, makeshift shelters that weren't there 5 years ago. People walk with the same slow, drained movements you once only saw in big cities. Not homeless yet, but close. Not addicted yet, but slipping. Not hopeless yet, but fading. The look is spreading. The energy is spreading. The emotional collapse is spreading. Some of these small towns were already struggling long before the crisis made headlines. Factories closed. Jobs moved overseas. Young people left for bigger cities and never returned. Entire communities began aging without replacement. When the money disappeared, so did the spirit. And when the spirit goes, the people follow. Not physically, but emotionally. In rural areas, the transformation is even stranger. Fields that once felt peaceful now look abandoned. Houses sit quiet, their paint peeling, their porches empty. Long stretches of highway feel unnervingly still, like you're driving through the remains of something that hasn't officially died yet, but no longer feels alive either. And on those highways, in gas station parking lots or beneath overpasses, you start seeing faces that look lost, wandering without purpose, carrying everything they own in a torn backpack. These aren't the images Americans expect to see outside big cities. But here they are, the same blank stares, the same slow steps, the same exhaustion carved into people's expressions. It's as if the emotional collapse began at the coasts, then crept inward until it reached the heart of the country. Even in suburbs, the places designed to protect families from chaos, you see subtle signs. Neighbors who used to wave now avoid eye contact. Parents who once filled parks now rush home in silence. Teenagers walk with headphones in, shoulders slumped, their eyes glued to the ground. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, but it's happening. A quiet shift in the way people move, the way they talk, the way they carry themselves. The zombie effect isn't about appearance, it's about energy. And that energy is changing everywhere. Because when the cost of living crushes you, when the future feels uncertain, when the news is filled with crisis after crisis, people retreat inside themselves. They shut down. They survive instead of living. The spread is invisible until suddenly it isn't. One day, you're walking through a perfectly normal suburban shopping center, and you notice the same dead-eyed stare you saw in downtown Los Angeles. You hear the same exhausted sigh you heard in Philadelphia. You see the same hunched posture you saw in Portland. That's when you realize something chilling. This isn't a city problem. This is an American problem. A slow erosion that's reaching every corner of the country, from skyscrapers to small towns to quiet rural roads. A kind of social decay that spreads not through infection, but through stress, exhaustion, and hopelessness. A collapse that travels silently through communities until everyone feels it, even if they can't explain it. The zombie apocalypse people joke about online isn't coming from movies or monsters. It's coming from real life, from the pressure crushing millions, from the desperation growing everywhere, from a society that's losing its ability to take care of itself. If you follow the path of collapse long enough, a terrifying picture starts to form. Because what's happening right now isn't just a moment or a phase or a temporary crisis that will magically fix itself. It's the beginning of a shift, a deep fracture in the foundation of the country. And if nothing changes, the America we know today won't be recognizable in the years ahead. Every day, more people fall into the same slow-motion drift, eyes tired, shoulders heavy, hope fading. Every week, more streets begin to mirror the scenes we once believed could only exist in small corners of large cities. Every month, More communities slip into the shadows, losing the spark that makes a place feel alive. And once a city crosses that line, once the energy drains out, once businesses leave, once the streets fill with silence instead of opportunity, it rarely comes back. That's the chilling truth no politician wants to admit. Collapse doesn't reverse easily. Hope doesn't return overnight. And people who fall into these zombie-like states don't suddenly wake up just because someone announces a new program or plan. If the country continues on this path, these zombie cities won't be isolated disasters. They will spread like a slow wave, reshaping the entire landscape. Blocks that look abandoned today will turn into neighborhoods that people avoid tomorrow. Neighborhoods that feel unsafe now will become full-blown no-go zones. City centers will hollow out. Small towns will fade away. The streets will fill with more blank faces, more broken bodies, more silent suffering. This is what a society looks like when the weight becomes too much for millions to carry. Not a dramatic explosion, not a sudden collapse, but a slow, steady unraveling. You can already feel it. In the tension of everyday life, in the rising anxiety, in the exhaustion that never seems to go away. People are working harder than ever just to stay afloat. Families are cutting deeper into their savings. Young people are losing hope before they've even started their adult lives. And everywhere you look, the same hollow expression appears. The look of someone who is tired of surviving. If America doesn't confront this crisis soon, the homelessness, the addiction, the crushing cost of living, the mental collapse, then the country won't face a zombie apocalypse from fiction. It will face something far worse. A nation where millions are alive physically, but dead inside, drifting through their days with no purpose, no support, and no path forward. And that is the real meltdown. Not fire, not explosions, not chaos in the streets, but the quiet, invisible decay of human strength. The slow burning out of a population that no longer believes in the promise of tomorrow. A collapse that comes not with a bang, but with a whisper. As you look at these streets, as you see the faces of people who have fallen into this silent darkness, you're forced to confront a truth that's impossible to ignore. This isn't an apocalypse movie. This isn't exaggerated. This is America right now. And unless something changes, the zombie cities you see today, the broken streets, the empty eyes, the drifting crowds, won't be exceptions. They'll be the future. The meltdown has already begun, and the rest of the country is not as far behind as it thinks.